The store's receipt paper printed symbols I couldn't recognize. At first I thought the printer head was dirty. That happens sometimes during night shift. The receipt machine sits beside the register all day breathing dust and heat. Around midnight it starts acting tired. Letters breaking apart, numbers stretching thin like threads. So when the receipt slid out and the text looked wrong, I didn't think much of it. I tore it off and glanced down. Instead of prices and item codes, the paper showed a tight line of small black shapes. Not letters, not numbers. They looked like thin hooks and angled bones arranged carefully across the strip. Some curved inward like claws. Others were sharp triangles that leaned against each other as if balancing. I turned the receipt sideways. Still nothing familiar. The fluorescent lights above the counter flickered softly, casting a weak ripple through the white tile floor. Behind me, the refrigerators exhaled their slow mechanical breath. I tapped the printer. "Great," I muttered. Sometimes a restart fixes it. I opened the register drawer, hit the reset switch, and waited while the machine hummed itself awake again. The store was empty. Outside the glass door, distant traffic passed along the highway, tires whispering through damp pavement. The parking lot lights buzzed faintly. Somewhere far down the road, a truck horn sounded once. I rang up the same purchase again. Just a bottle of iced tea I'd scanned earlier to test the register. The receipt printed smoothly. I tore it off. Same symbols. Perfectly aligned this time. Crisp and deliberate. They looked organized. Like a sentence written in a language that had never used ink before. I leaned closer to the paper. The smell of warm receipt stock drifted up. Dry, papery, slightly chemical. For a second I thought I saw one of the symbols change shape. Not dramatically. Just a tiny adjustment like a muscle tightening under skin. I blinked. The symbol stayed still. I folded the receipt and set it aside. Probably a firmware glitch, I told myself. The store's register system is older than the soda cooler. Maybe it had switched encoding formats somehow. I grabbed another item from the counter. Pack of gum. Scan. The beep echoed quietly through the empty store. The printer whirred again. I watched the paper slide out. More symbols. Longer line this time. Some repeated. Others were new, looping shapes that almost resembled handwriting but refused to settle into anything readable. I tore it off slowly. The symbols seemed slightly darker toward the center of the receipt, like they'd been printed twice. The fluorescent light above aisle 2 flickered. A soft stuttering pulse. The refrigerators along the back wall hummed steadily, their cold air drifting through the aisles like quiet breathing. I looked down at the receipt again. One symbol stood alone near the end of the line. A thin vertical mark crossed by 3 shorter strokes. For some reason it felt familiar. Not recognizable. Just familiar. Like a word you know in a dream but forget the moment you wake. I rubbed my thumb across it. The ink didn't smear. Another car passed outside. Headlights swept briefly across the windows, sending long reflections through the aisles. For a moment the store looked deeper than it should. The rows of shelves stretched longer in the glass reflection than they did in reality. When the light passed, everything returned to normal. I folded the receipt and placed it beside the first one. Then I noticed something strange. The symbols on the 2 receipts weren't identical. They were similar but not the same. Some shapes had moved. Not physically. Structurally. The repeating hooks from the first receipt had shifted positions in the second. Almost like grammar. The printer clicked softly behind me. I hadn't touched the register. Another strip of paper pushed itself out. Slowly, the machine printed without any beep or transaction. The strip curled forward over the edge of the counter. I stared at it. More symbols. These were larger, less tightly packed, and spaced in a pattern that made my chest feel slightly hollow. I leaned closer. The shapes were starting to resemble letters. Not English, but something close enough that my brain tried to force meaning into them. A curve, a slash, 3 lines intersecting. I had the uneasy feeling they were learning something. Behind me, the refrigerators kicked into a louder cycle. Their hum deepened, vibrating faintly through the tile floor. The fluorescent lights flickered again. This time, the entire store dimmed for half a second. In that dimness, the receipt paper looked darker. The symbols looked almost wet. The lights brightened again. The paper looked normal. I tore the strip off. The bottom of the receipt contained a final cluster of symbols. Short, centered. It looked like a name. My stomach tightened. I compared it with the earlier receipts. The same cluster appeared at the bottom of those two. I just hadn't noticed before. Always the same sequence, printed slightly bolder than the rest. I turned the strip upside down. Sideways. Nothing changed. But the longer I stared at the cluster, the more certain I felt that it belonged to me. Not logically, instinctively, the way you recognize your own handwriting without thinking about it. The printer whirred again. Another receipt pushed out. Then another. The machine had begun printing continuously now. Each strip carried longer chains of symbols. Paragraphs. They spilled across the counter and curled down toward the floor. I didn't stop them. The store had grown very quiet except for the humming machines. Even the traffic outside seemed distant now. I picked up one of the new receipts. The symbols were shifting again. Some repeated in patterns that reminded me of sentences. Others appeared only once, large and deliberate. Toward the bottom of the strip, I found the familiar cluster again. My cluster. But this time something followed it. A new symbol. A small hooked mark that hadn't appeared before. It looked like a cursor. Waiting. The printer paused. The paper trembled slightly in the machine. The fluorescent lights flickered above me. I realized then that the symbols weren't random. They were recording. Every beep of the register. Every item scanned. Every minute passing inside the store. The receipts weren't transactions. They were logs of something larger than sales. Something patient. Something that had been writing long before I noticed. The printer clicked once more. A final strip slid out. Just one line. I looked down. The cluster that felt like my name appeared again. But this time it was longer. More symbols attached to it. Growing outward like branches. The paper trembled faintly in my hand. Behind me, the refrigerators exhaled another long breath of cold air. The fluorescent lights steadied. The store felt still again. I looked toward the glass door. My reflection stared back from the dark window. But behind the reflection, faint and layered across the glass, I could see rows of receipt paper hanging from the shelves. Thousands of strips, printed long before tonight. Every one of them filled with the same living symbols. And somewhere in the middle of that endless language, I knew my line had just begun. The door chimed softly, and I looked up from behind the counter. A woman had entered. It was late, just past 2 in the morning. The store was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerators along the back wall and the occasional flicker of the fluorescent lights above. She carried something in her hands. A snow globe. I blinked. It was shaped exactly like our store. Not vaguely, not in the abstract way a souvenir might suggest a place. Every aisle, every cooler, every stack of shelves was replicated in miniature. The fluorescent lights glowed faintly inside the globe, tiny and precise, and a pale reflection shimmered across its curved surface. And there, behind the cash register in the tiny interior, was me. I swallowed. The woman didn't speak. She didn't even look at me. Her gaze was downward, fixed on the globe as she approached the counter. Her hands were steady, unnaturally so, cradling the object as though she were carrying something sacred or dangerous. Cleared my throat. "Can I help you?" She didn't answer, only set the globe gently on the counter. The glass was cold. I could feel it through the thin layer of plastic she had wrapped around it. A faint, unnatural chill radiated outward, drifting across the aisle where the candy racks were stacked. I leaned closer. The globe captured the store perfectly. I could see the aisles stretching, the coolers along the back, the reflection of the overhead lights. Every detail was intact, even the small crack in the tile near aisle 3, where I had dropped a soda can last week. I moved slightly just to test it. Inside the globe, I moved too. My miniature self shifted with a subtle delay, a twitch too mechanical to be natural. It wasn't exact, not perfectly synchronous, but it was close enough to be unsettling. I lifted a hand, and the tiny version hesitated, then lifted its hand just a fraction of a second later. Where did you get this? I asked, voice low. She shook her head slowly. No words. Her lips moved faintly, but no sound came. The snow globe exhaled a cold mist across the counter, brushing against my forearms. Tiny flecks of snow swirled inside, though there was no winter outside. The flakes moved in impossible ways, sometimes dropping straight, sometimes rising, sometimes spiraling horizontally as though guided by invisible hands. I stepped back, suddenly aware of the fluorescent hum, the air-conditioned cold, the smell of aged paper from the receipt printer. Everything smelled sharper. The store felt smaller. The lights seemed lower. She leaned slightly forward, and I realized she had tilted the globe toward me. The miniature me was standing at the register, looking up at her, then glancing directly at me. I froze. Time seemed to slow. A bottle of soda in aisle 2 wobbled slightly, though no one had touched it. The tiny lights in the globe flickered in patterns that didn't match the store above it. I caught glimpses of my own reflection in the globe, doubled and tripled across its curved surface. I blinked, and the miniature version of the store had shifted slightly. The shelves were longer, the counters narrower. The small figure at the register, me, looked smaller than before, like it had been compressed. My chest tightened. I could hear the faint creak of the floor beneath the counters, though nothing had moved. Are you selling this? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She didn't answer. She tilted her head, just enough for her hair to fall forward and obscure her face. She tapped the globe gently. A ripple ran through the snow inside, and the tiny me blinked twice, then lifted a hand in a motion that was just slightly delayed compared to mine. I stepped closer. Every instinct told me to run, but the air was heavy, charged with some quiet insistence. I leaned over the counter and peered in. Something inside the globe had moved independently. The miniature coolers along the back wall were open. Tiny doors I knew were always closed. A snowflake hovered, suspended midair, then drifted upward instead of falling. The tiny shelves cast shadows that bent impossibly toward the center aisle, as if the globe itself were breathing. My hand twitched. I touched the glass. My miniature self flinched in perfect imitation, though it had no reason to. I tried to pull back, but the chill from the globe crawled up my arm, sinking into my chest. My reflection fractured across the curved glass, multiplied like shards of something broken. The woman stood silently. She tilted the globe again, and the tiny me moved, crossing the counter, stepping toward the edge of the miniature floor, looking directly at me. My own hand twitched in response. I felt a pulse of something foreign. Not fear exactly. Recognition. A memory that wasn't mine. I glanced at the freezer aisle and saw that the refrigerators hummed differently now. Slower, deliberate. Even the fluorescent lights flickered in rhythm with the swirl of snow in the globe. I realized with a creeping horror that the globe wasn't static. It was updating. Every time I moved, the miniature me moved. Every breath, every blink was mirrored, slightly delayed, slightly wrong. I stumbled backward, bumping into the counter. My knuckles pressed against the globe. It was smooth, icy. My reflection warped. I stared at the tiny figure across the miniature counter, and for a second I couldn't tell which was real. The woman's hand hovered above the globe, and I felt my body tense, as though it recognized her as a conduit. She tapped the glass once. The snow inside spiraled violently, a vortex forming in the center of the store's miniature aisle. My miniature self raised a hand toward it, and then something shifted. Not the figure. Me. The edges of my vision darkened. The air grew sharper. I felt my heartbeat echo strangely, mismatched with my ears. The fluorescent hum above warped, and I swore I heard my own voice coming from the globe. A whisper I hadn't spoken, words I didn't understand. I tried to step back. The globe tilted again. Inside, The miniature shelves moved slightly. The tiny coolers opened and closed, the snow swirling faster. The miniature me froze and then slowly rotated, turning toward me with a face that was mine, but not quite. The expression was serene, almost welcoming, yet impossibly alien. I stumbled, backing toward the door. The woman said nothing. The globe's snow swirled violently now, a blizzard contained within glass. The tiny lights flickered in precise rhythm with the fluorescent above me. I realized then, with a horror that sank through every nerve, that the miniature me was no longer mirroring me. It was replacing me. Every subtle twitch, every blink, every breath inside the globe was becoming synchronized with mine, overtaking the original. I reached out to touch the globe again. The chill enveloped me. The air inside the store shifted, bending around me. My body trembled. My reflection fractured across the globe, multiplied and stretched. I could feel it, something inside, learning, replicating, waiting. The woman tilted the globe again. The tiny me smiled. I had not moved, but the miniature me did. And for the first time, I understood. It wasn't a snow globe. It was a mirror, not of my face, of my existence. And it was updating in real time.